Harvard University will go to war with President Trump, unlike elite educational institutions that are meekly falling in line with the federal government's demands. The White House said on Monday that they were freezing $2.2 billion in multi-year grants and $60 million in multi-year contract value to Harvard.
Trump had imposed conditions on the university if it wanted to keep receiving funding. Those conditions include abolishing its DEI programs, hiring based on merit, banning mask wearing at campus protests, and ensuring scholars who presumably the Trump administration would judge as prioritizing activism over scholarship to have less power. Harvard said Monday, for the government to retreat from these partnerships now risks not only the health and well-being of millions of individuals, but also the economic security and vitality of our nation. The university's president, Alan Garber, said that the university will not surrender its independence or constitutional rights.
A White House spokesperson said that President Trump was committed to ending unchecked anti-Semitism. Harvard or any institution that wishes to violate Title VI is by law not eligible for federal funding.
And former President Barack Obama chimed into the conversation, writing on X, Harvard has set an example for other higher ed institutions, rejecting an unlawful and ham-handed attempt to stifle academic freedom while taking concrete steps to make sure all students at Harvard can benefit from an environment of intellectual inquiry, rigorous debate, and mutual respect.
Meanwhile, conservative author Rachel Bovard wrote, if Harvard wants $9 billion from the taxpayers, then yes, it absolutely surrenders a measure of its independence to the feds. So, here we are. Harvard, unlike Columbia, is saying, no, we're going to fight this.
Yep.
They have plenty of resources to do so. They're a very elite, rich institution with a massive billions and billions in their endowment to do so. Look, you will not be surprised by what I have to say. I don't think the federal government has much business policing what is being taught at universities, but that goes both ways. And Barack Obama is a massive hypocrite because his administration did exactly the same thing with its guidance to universities, including Harvard, to encourage them to adopt policies at the threat of losing federal funding that violated free speech processes. That's not just my opinion. That was the opinions of Harvard professors I interviewed about it at the time. Leftist, progressive professors. Maybe I should do a radar separately on just my previous conversations with the faculty of Harvard saying that what Obama was doing to the school was unlawful and violated their principles. So here we are where Barack Obama walked so that Donald Trump could run. Now they are, trying to do this kind of war on anti-Semitism that to me is quite half-baked. And actually, anti-Semitic discrimination and harassment would, yes, be a violation of campus policies and illegal for other reasons, and they should prevent that if it's happening, just as they actually do have to prevent anti-black racism or misogyny or whatever unconstitutional harassment of people for identity-based reasons or illegal harassment of people for identity-based reasons. If that's happening, they got to do something about it. I think the evidence put forth that that's really what's going on instead of just protesting, it has not been well established, and I would encourage the Trump administration not to take the position that all opposition to what Israel is doing is somehow anti-Semitic. That's the national security justification here for eroding free speech norms is, again, very, very, very bad, and they shouldn't do it. So I have no common cause with them on that, but I would push back on the idea that this is some new, brazen, never-before attempted scheme for the federal government to take away free speech rights at Harvard. It is well in keeping with what I've seen for the last 15 years.
You will be unsurprised to learn that I see things very, very differently. And I think the Obama thing, with all due respect, is a false equivalence. Obama never froze funding in this way. The Trump administration is freezing the funding. But more importantly than that, the Trump administration is trying to dig its fingers into what is actually taught at universities in these departments. In the letter that the Trump administration sent to Harvard last Friday, there were 10 either departments or programs that it highlighted for additional scrutiny. That is on its face a presidential administration trying to interfere with the teaching of a private university. Then, in addition, you have a number of other issues with that Trump letter, including the idea that it would empower faculty that I guess would agree with the Trump administration's view of things. And they say this explicitly, that one of the objectives was to reduce the power held by students. That has nothing to do with anti-Semitism or the debate over anti-Semitism. It is actually about the Trump administration going after centers of dissent in this country, whether it's academia, whether it's the media, whether it's the sciences, and various other things like that. Now, in relation to what is going on here, obviously, I applaud Harvard for fighting the good fight. I agree with what Obama said there. But here's the other thing that I wonder. When the people who run Columbia University look at this, are they not ashamed at how abjectly they capitulated on basically the same matter, allowing a presidential administration to interfere with their institution because it wielded the threat of funding cuts against them? That was an abject surrender, which Harvard, to its great credit, is not doing.
Yeah, I think they probably do look a little cowardly, because they have not as much money as Harvard, but they have tons of money too.
Billions, yeah.
Which, to my mind, always erodes their need for our generous taxpayer dollars to be shoveled to them. Some conservatives, I'm not necessarily taking this position, but some conservatives will certainly say that if you're taking public money, that's going to come with strings attached. And again, that was the attitude the Obama administration took. I just disagreed that under existing law, those strings actually were attached. But if they said, for instance, even in this case, Harvard was just forced to shut down what was, in my view, an abjectly discriminatory practice in terms of its hirings, its admissions affecting Asian students, abject, proven in a courtroom, considerations of Asian applicants as somehow deficient in their personalities that was really contemptible if you looked at the court filings, and they were ordered to stop doing that by the Supreme Court. If that decision had not been reached and the Trump administration came in and said, you are violating this policy violates federal non-discrimination law and you have to change it or you're losing funding, I think I would have been hard-pressed, frankly, to disagree with it. This is different because this has to do, I don't agree that this should be, what they're teaching is violating federal law. That seems very sketchy to me, and I similarly don't think, it's not even been well established to me that the protests we're seeing are by themselves anti-Semitic. I'm sure there's some anti-Semitic behavior, but also it's not against the First Amendment to be anti-Semitic. You can, if you paint a swastika on somebody's dorm room, then it will be considered a form of race-based harassment that is illegal, that they can do. These are pretty carefully drawn lines that existing court precedents to separate what is speech, what is action, what is protected, what would be considered a hate crime or a bias incident, that kind of thing. And I don't think they're getting it quite right. But there is what conservatives are saying in this case is that, well, the money comes with strings attached. If you want to be an institution, there are institutions, Hillsdale College, which I visited a couple weeks ago. I spoke to journalism students there. Very picturesque, pleasant campus with bright young minds. It takes no federal funding, and it can have whatever policies it wants, and there's nothing the government can say about it.
Yes,
Harvard could do that, and it's a lot richer than an institution than Hillsdale.
It could do that, but here's where I think we just get to a philosophical difference between liberals and conservatives. Because that argument that you cited, and I understand that you yourself are not fully endorsing it, but you're saying some conservatives say they could just give up the funding. That is indeed true, but my argument would be it is not a zero-sum game. There is, in fact, such a thing as the public good. To strip Harvard of funding is to strip scientists and other researchers of the capacity to achieve things that would be for the greater good of society. It is for the good of this country that the most elite academic minds be resourced properly to push forward the boundaries of knowledge, be that in medicine or psychology or social sciences or anything else. And so to say, well, we're kind of peeved with these guys, so we're going to pull the funding, is ultimately a self-defeating policy as far as that greater good is concerned.
I mean, if we're all about the greater good or making, Harvard be more or serve the greater good. You know, Harvard has not expanded how many people it admits very much at all in I don't even know how long. And again, it's sitting on a massive pile of money. We say this is such an important tool for our society. You know, what if the demand was, this isn't even necessarily ideological one way or the other demand. What if the demand is they have to admit twice as many people to start educating more people to benefit from if this is a public kind of resource? Well, we're not saying that. We can't tell them to do anything. They can do whatever they want, and they're entitled to all of this money, even though they're already extremely wealthy. They're sitting on a $50 billion endowment, and we can have no scrutiny or accountability of that. And also they're entitled to the funding. That starts to get a little, well, they can do whatever they want, and we can't, and I would say that's fine. They can do whatever they want, but then I don't know why we have to pay for it necessarily. It should come with no scrutiny.
But do you not think that there is a public interest in experts or people of real academic prowess being funded to push forward their research? Do you not think there's any public gain?
I certainly think there is some public gain.
Right.
I think it can be overemphasized. I think the increased credentialing of our society that, people, you have an elite fancy degree. I'm not sure it's all that valuable. The scientific research being done, yes, true. And people should, be able, I think they should admit more students. There's so many students who are qualified to get into Harvard, and then they were picking the ones that were like the least Asian looking, which was pretty contemptible in my view. I don't know. It's kind of a mess. I don't think the Trump administration should be waging this specific fight. I think if they were still doing the admission scheme, that would have been a fight worth having. I don't think what they're teaching in the Arab Studies department is really the business of the federal government, but I've been overruled on that. I'm not in charge of the Trump administration.
And Harvard is fighting the good fight, which I'm very glad about.
Next up, Trump versus the media, and this time he's railing against CBS. More rising right after this.